You've probably heard the stories before, the blurry lights above deserts, the grainy footage, the official statements that say nothing and somehow say everything. But what if the real question isn't whether UFOs exist? What if the real question is why they keep appearing above nuclear bases, why they circle missile silos like silent vultures? Why trained military officers with everything to lose describe the same impossible maneuvers over and over again? Because this isn't about distant farm fields or random highways at night. This is about the most heavily guarded places on Earth, the bunkers buried beneath concrete and steel, the launch keys, the codes, the weapons that could end civilization in less than an hour, and the fact that something unknown seems very interested in them, interested enough to hover directly above them, interested enough to interfere with them, interested enough to shut them down. In the late hours when most of the world sleeps, there are rooms underground where red lights glow and screens flicker and men and women sit in silence waiting for a signal that must never come, and sometimes, without warning, alarms begin to sound, not because of an incoming missile, not because of a human enemy, but because something is moving above the base, something that does not appear on commercial radar, something that moves too fast, stops too abruptly, changes direction in ways that ignore the rules of physics, and as it hovers, systems begin to fail, missiles go offline one by one, as if someone, or something, is flipping switches from the sky. Think about that for a moment. Weapons designed with layers of redundancy, shielded against electromagnetic pulses, hardened against sabotage. Built with the assumption that the enemy will try everything to disable them, and yet reports describe entire flights of nuclear missiles becoming inoperable at the exact moment a glowing object hangs overhead, silent, watchful, untouchable. Former officers have described standing there helpless, staring at panels that should never fail, feeling something colder than fear, because fear implies you understand the threat, and this was something else, the realization that whatever was above them had access, control, awareness, as if it understood the architecture of our most secret machines better than we did. And it isn't just one base, it isn't one country. Similar stories echo from different continents, from rival nations who agree on almost nothing except that strange objects have been seen near their nuclear facilities, that security teams have tracked lights pacing their convoys transporting warheads, that radar operators have watched unknown craft drift directly over restricted airspace where even birds are sometimes detected and flagged, and yet these objects come and go without consequence. Without interception, without explanation. Imagine being a guard on the perimeter, rifle in hand, trained to respond to any breach, and looking up to see a disk or sphere hovering beyond the fence line, close enough to see its glow reflecting off the razor wire, close enough that you know if it meant harm you would be powerless to stop it, and then imagine reporting it, filling out forms, answering questions, only to be told it was probably a drone. Probably a misidentification, probably nothing, even though you know what you saw did not move like anything built by human hands. The hook is this: if these objects are real and they are repeatedly drawn to nuclear sites, then either coincidence is the most persistent force in the universe, or someone is monitoring our ability to destroy ourselves. But monitoring implies intention, and intention implies intelligence, and intelligence implies awareness of what those weapons are capable of. That's where it starts to get uncomfortable, because it suggests we are not alone in our most secret moments, that when we built devices capable of splitting the atom and turning cities into shadows, something noticed. Some researchers believe the pattern began in the early days of the atomic age, shortly after the first tests lit up the desert sky brighter than the sun, as if the shockwave of that explosion wasn't just physical but cosmic, like ringing a bell that echoed farther than we intended, a signal flare announcing to the dark that a new species had unlocked a dangerous secret. And what if the lights that began appearing afterward were not invaders but inspectors, not conquerors but observers, watching to see whether we would use this power again, watching to see if we would press the button? The more you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes, because nuclear bases are among the most secure places on Earth, layered defenses, encrypted communications, constant surveillance. And yet the one thing they cannot defend against is something that does not play by our rules, something that does not file flight plans, something that accelerates from a standstill to hypersonic speed without a sonic boom, something that descends from high altitude to hover mere meters above a silo lid, and then vanishes as if the sky swallowed it. Pilots have described chasing such objects only to watch them outpace jets as if the aircraft were standing still. Radar technicians have watched blips split into multiple targets and then merge again, as if mass and momentum were optional, and always, there is a pattern of proximity to nuclear assets, storage facilities, submarines carrying warheads beneath black oceans, research labs where scientists handle enriched uranium behind thick glass. If it were random, you would expect equal sightings above shopping malls and cornfields, and yes, there are reports everywhere. But the clustering around nuclear sites is what keeps resurfacing, like a recurring nightmare you can't quite dismiss. Now imagine the psychological weight on those who witness it, the knowledge that the ultimate deterrent, the weapon meant to guarantee mutual destruction, can be quietly disabled by an unknown presence in the sky, not with explosions or hacking or sabotage teams, but with silence. There are declassified documents describing incidents where multiple missiles went offline simultaneously, technicians scrambling to restore them, commanders demanding explanations, and outside, hovering lights performing impossible maneuvers before darting away, leaving nothing but shaken personnel and systems that suddenly, inexplicably, return to normal. What kind of technology can selectively interfere with hardened military hardware without leaving a trace? What kind of motive would drive repeated visits to the most dangerous stockpiles on the planet? If it were an adversary nation, we would expect escalation, retaliation, open conflict, but instead there is ambiguity, a strange restraint, almost as if the objective is not to provoke but to observe, not to attack but to remind. And that reminder is chilling. Your most powerful weapons are not beyond our reach. Some speculate that these encounters represent a warning, a cosmic intervention policy where advanced intelligences monitor emerging civilizations to prevent self-annihilation, stepping in subtly when lines are crossed. But even that comforting narrative has a darker edge, because it implies we are children playing with matches under the watchful gaze of something older and far more capable, and children do not always survive their lessons. Others fear a different interpretation, that the interest in nuclear facilities is strategic, that these objects are mapping our defenses, testing our response times, probing vulnerabilities, like predators circling a campfire to see how close they can get without being burned. In that scenario, the shutdowns are not warnings but rehearsals. The thought lingers in the back of your mind: if something can turn off our missiles, can it also turn them on? Could it manipulate systems in ways we do not yet understand? The scariest part isn't the lights in the sky, it's the possibility that control over our ultimate weapons may not be entirely ours. Deep underground, officers sit with keys that require 2 hands to turn, procedures designed to ensure no single person can unleash destruction, but those safeguards assume human actors. They assume the threat comes from within or from a rival nation. They do not account for an external intelligence capable of bypassing physical and digital barriers without touching them. The more you dig into the reports, the more consistent the details become. Objects described as glowing or metallic, often silent, sometimes emitting a low hum, capable of sudden acceleration, frequently appearing during periods of heightened nuclear tension, as if responding to geopolitical stress like a pressure sensor in the sky. During exercises simulating launch scenarios, sightings increase, as though something is paying attention to our drills, learning our rhythms, understanding our protocols. It is one thing to imagine we are alone in the universe, shouting into a void that does not answer. It is another to imagine that we are being watched specifically when we prepare for annihilation. There are stories of security teams aiming weapons at hovering craft only to experience temporary equipment malfunctions, radios filled with static, vehicles stalling, as if proximity alone disrupts technology. And when the objects depart, everything resumes, leaving behind only testimony and a creeping sense of vulnerability. Skeptics argue misidentification, secret human technology, psychological contagion, and those explanations are comfortable because they keep the unknown within human boundaries. But comfort fades when the pattern refuses to disappear, when decades of reports from trained observers converge on the same unsettling theme. Nuclear weapons and unidentified aerial phenomena share the same airspace more often than chance would predict. Imagine standing on a launch control center floor at 3 a.m, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, coffee gone cold, and hearing that the missile you are responsible for has just gone offline, then being told that an unidentified object is hovering above the silo, and knowing that no protocol covers this, no manual explains what to do when the sky itself seems to take an interest in your arsenal. The horror builds slowly because it isn't loud or cinematic, it's quiet and procedural and buried in paperwork, it lives in footnotes and testimony and redacted pages. But the implication grows heavier the longer you consider it. We built weapons to ensure our dominance, and something responded. Whether that response is protective, hostile, curious, or indifferent remains unknown, and perhaps that uncertainty is the most frightening element of all, because ambiguity denies us preparation. If they are guardians, what are the terms of their protection, and what happens if we violate them? If they are scouts, what fleet waits beyond the dark? If they are either, if they are simply observers cataloging a species on the brink, then we are specimens under glass, unaware that the lab technician is taking notes every time we rattle the cage with nuclear drills. The connection between UFOs and nuclear bases might be coincidence, misinterpretation, classified technology, or something far stranger, but the pattern persists like a whisper that grows louder the more you try to ignore it, and once you see that pattern, it is difficult to unsee it, because it reframes the atomic age not as a purely human story of power and fear, but as a chapter in a larger narrative where we are not the only authors. And that is where the true dread settles in, not in flashing lights or dramatic chases, but in the quiet possibility that at the very moment humanity gained the power to erase itself, something else leaned closer, watching our silos, hovering over our submarines, drifting above our bunkers, patient and unreadable, waiting to see what we will do next, and whether we deserve to keep the fire we have stolen.